They said he didn't belong there, that his ticket must be fake, that someone like him couldn't possibly afford first class. Within minutes, Marcus Sterling was on his knees, a decorated CEO, humiliated in front of hundreds, his belongings scattered across the airport floor like trash. But what that flight attendant didn't know, what those smirking officers didn't know, the man they were degrading didn't just fly first class. He owned the company that built half the planes in that terminal. And in exactly 48 hours, his next board meeting would change everything. One phone call, one decision, one airline brought to its knees. This is the story of how institutional racism met corporate power and lost.
Marcus Sterling wasn't supposed to be on that flight. He'd planned to take the company jet, Gulfstream G650, leather interior, complete privacy. But at the last minute, his assistant reminded him of something he'd promised himself years ago. Stay grounded. Stay connected to real people. Never forget where you came from. So there he was, at Denver International Airport on a Tuesday morning, standing in the first-class check-in line with his leather briefcase and a rolling carry-on that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He wore a tailored gray Tom Ford suit, subtle but unmistakable in its quality. His Apple Watch buzzed constantly, emails from Singapore, Tokyo, New York. His company, Sterling Aerospace Technologies, had just closed a $2.3 billion contract with 3 major airlines to revolutionize cabin pressure systems. The irony of what was about to happen wouldn't be lost on him later. Marcus had built his empire from nothing. Raised by a single mother in South Chicago, he'd worked 3 jobs to put himself through MIT, graduated top of his engineering class, started his company in a garage with $50,000 in student loans and a dream that people said was impossible for someone who looked like him. 20 years later, Sterling Aerospace held patents that every major airline depended on. His technology was in planes flying over 60 countries. He'd been featured in Forbes, Fortune, Bloomberg. He'd had dinner with presidents. But none of that mattered when you were a black man standing in an airport. He noticed the glances. He always noticed them. The way the woman in line ahead of him clutched her purse a little tighter. The way the businessman behind him seemed surprised when Marcus pulled out a first-class boarding pass. These were microaggressions he learned to ignore. Tiny cuts that bled in private, but never in public. "First class, Mr. Sterling," the gate agent said with a professional smile. "You're all set. Boarding begins in 30 minutes. Marcus nodded, found a quiet corner near the window, and opened his laptop. He had a presentation to review for Thursday's board meeting, the one where he'd be announcing a new partnership that would triple their market share. His phone rang. It was David Chen, his CFO. "Marcus, the Goldman Sachs analysts are asking for—" "Send them the Q3 projections," Marcus interrupted gently. "And David, after this trip, take your family to Hawaii. You've earned it." He ended the call and stared out at the tarmac. A Boeing 787 was being refueled, one of the planes his company had helped design components for. He felt a quiet pride, not arrogance, just the satisfaction of knowing his work mattered, that he'd proven wrong every guidance counselor who'd steered him toward more realistic careers, every investor who'd passed on his pitch because they couldn't see the vision, every person who had ever looked at him and seen limitations instead of possibilities. The boarding announcement crackled over the speakers. Marcus gathered his things, pulled out his phone to show his digital boarding pass, and joined the priority boarding line. He was exhausted. The past month had been brutal. Late nights, early mornings, flying between Seattle, Munich, and Shanghai. He was looking forward to this flight. 5 hours of uninterrupted work time, or maybe just sleep. A meal that didn't come from a hotel room service menu. Some peace. He had no idea he was about to become a spectacle. The first-class cabin was nearly empty when he boarded. He found his seat, 2A, window side, and began settling in. He placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment, his carry-on under the seat in front of him. He pulled out his iPad and noise-canceling headphones. Normal routine. He'd done this 1,000 times. That's when she appeared. The flight attendant was in her mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back severely, lips pressed into a thin line of permanent disapproval. Her name tag read Jennifer. She stopped in the aisle directly beside Marcus's seat and stood there, hovering, staring. Marcus looked up. "Good morning." She didn't return the greeting. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." Marcus blinked, momentarily confused. "I already showed it at the gate." "I need to see it again." Her voice was flat, suspicious. A prickle of unease traveled down Marcus's spine, that old familiar warning system that black people develop early and never lose. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, opened the Airline app, and showed her the digital boarding pass. Seat 2A, first class, his name clearly visible, Marcus J. Sterling. Jennifer stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked back at him with open skepticism. "This is your ticket?" "Yes, that's my ticket." "Sir, I'm going to need to verify this." "Verify what exactly?" "That this ticket wasn't purchased fraudulently." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Around them, other passengers were beginning to board, beginning to notice. A white couple settling into seats across the aisle exchanged glances. An older man 2 rows back was suddenly very interested in the interaction. "I can assure you," Marcus said carefully, his voice level despite the rage building in his chest, "I purchased it myself 3 days ago through the airline's website." "Mm-hmm." Jennifer's tone dripped with disbelief. "I'm going to need you to step out into the aisle while I contact the gate." "You're asking me to leave my seat?" "You are asking me to cooperate, sir." The word "sir" sounded like an insult the way she said it. Marcus took a slow breath. He knew this game. He'd played it his entire life. The moment you show anger, you become the threat. The moment you raise your voice, you're the problem. So he did what he'd always done. He complied. He stood, stepped into the aisle, and watched as Jennifer pulled out her radio and spoke in hushed tones to someone at the gate. By now, the entire first-class cabin was watching. The boarding process had slowed. People were whispering. Some were pulling out phones. A minute passed. 2 minutes. Marcus stood there, a successful CEO being treated like a criminal, and felt the old wounds opening. All the times he'd been followed in stores, all the times he'd been stopped by police for fitting a description, all the times he'd had to prove he belonged in spaces where people who looked like him were assumed not to belong. Jennifer finally lowered her radio. "Sir, I'm going to need you to show me another form of ID." "Another form? I've already shown you my boarding pass with my name on it." "Driver's license." Marcus's hands were trembling now. Not from fear, but from the effort of containing his fury. He pulled out his wallet and handed her his Illinois driver's license. She examined it as if it were a counterfeit bill, holding it up to the light, comparing the photo to his face with theatrical suspicion. "This says Chicago." "Yes, I live in Chicago." "But you're boarding in Denver?" "People travel for business." Marcus's voice had taken on an edge now. "Is there a problem, Jennifer?" She didn't like him using her name. Her eyes narrowed. "The problem, sir, is that we've had issues with fraudulent first-class tickets, and I'm doing my job by verifying passengers." "Have you verified everyone in first class or just me?" The question hung there, dangerous and impossible to answer honestly. That's when the supervisor arrived, summoned by Jennifer's radio call. He was a tall, white man in his 50s with gray hair and an air of exhausted authority. His name tag read, Thomas, lead flight attendant. "What seems to be the issue?" Thomas asked, but he was looking at Marcus, not Jennifer, already deciding who the problem was. Jennifer launched into her explanation, painting herself as the diligent employee, Marcus as the suspicious passenger with the questionable ticket. She kept using phrases like, didn't match our usual first-class demographic, and raised red flags that were code for one thing and one thing only. Thomas listened, nodding occasionally, then turned to Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me to the gate. We need to sort this out before the flight can depart." "Sort what out?" Marcus asked. "I've shown my boarding pass. I've shown my ID. What exactly are you accusing me of?" "Nobody's accusing you of anything, sir. We just need to verify." "You're verifying me because I'm black. That's what this is about. You looked at me and decided I didn't belong here." The cabin went silent. Passengers froze mid-motion, overhead bins half open, seatbelts half fastened. Everyone was staring now, and Marcus could feel the weight of their gazes, could see the discomfort in their faces. Some looked sympathetic, others looked annoyed that their flight was being delayed. None of them said a word. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, I'll have to call security." "Call them," Marcus said quietly, "because I'm not moving until someone explains to me why I'm being singled out when I've done nothing wrong." Thomas pulled out his radio. Within 3 minutes, 2 airport police officers appeared at the airplane door, both white, both large, both with hands resting casually near their belts in that universal posture of authority and implicit threat. They walked down the aisle slowly, and Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He thought of Philando Castile, of George Floyd, of every black man who'd been killed for less than this. "Sir, we're going to need you to exit the aircraft," one of the officers said. He was younger, maybe 30, with a military haircut and eyes that had already judged and convicted Marcus before hearing a word. "I have a valid ticket," Marcus said, his voice steady but his heart pounding. "I've shown my boarding pass and my ID. I have every right to be on this flight." "Sir, the airline has asked you to leave. You can go voluntarily, or we can make it involuntary. Your choice." Marcus looked around the cabin, at the passengers watching him with a mixture of pity and fear and morbid curiosity, as if he were a reality show playing out for their entertainment. At Jennifer, standing with her arms crossed, looking vindicated. At Thomas, who wouldn't meet his eyes. He thought of his mother, who cleaned houses to pay for his books. He thought of his daughter, who was starting college next year. He thought of all the times he'd swallowed his pride, bitten his tongue, played by the rules designed to keep him in his place. And then he thought about the board meeting on Thursday, about the $2.3 billion contract, about the power he'd built, brick by brick, in a system designed to crush him. "I want to speak to your supervisor," Marcus said to the officers, "and I want to file a formal complaint with the airline. This is racial profiling. It's illegal, and I will not—" "Sir, step off the plane, now!" The younger officer moved closer, hand now fully on his belt. The threat was clear. Marcus felt the walls closing in. This was the moment where it could go very, very wrong, where one wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture could end with him in handcuffs or worse. He was a CEO, a millionaire, a man who'd had coffee with senators, and none of it mattered. In this moment, he was just another black man being told he didn't belong here. "I'm going to record this," someone said from behind him. Marcus turned and saw a young black woman, maybe 25, holding up her phone. Her hand was shaking, but her voice was firm. "I'm recording everything, for his safety."
The officers exchanged glances. The presence of cameras changed calculations. "Ma'am, put the phone away," the younger officer said. "I have every right to record. This is wrong. Everyone here can see it's wrong." But nobody else moved. Nobody else spoke up. They just watched.
The older officer, the one who'd stayed quieter, stepped forward. His name tag read Miller. He looked at Marcus with something that might have been recognition or might have been calculation. "Sir, let's talk outside the aircraft," Miller said. His voice was calmer, more measured. "No cuffs, just a conversation. Can we do that?" Marcus felt the trap closing. If he refused, he'd be dragged off. If he went voluntarily, he'd be humiliated. Either way, he lost. He looked down at his hands, steady, capable hands that had drafted patents and signed billion-dollar deals, and felt them trembling. "Fine," he said quietly. "I'll go." He walked down the aisle with the two officers flanking him like a prisoner. Every eye in that cabin watched him leave. He heard whispers, saw phones recording, felt the weight of generations of this same humiliation pressing down on his shoulders. When they reached the jetway, Thomas, the supervisor, appeared with Marcus's belongings, his briefcase, his carry-on, dumped unceremoniously onto the floor. "You'll need to take your things," Thomas said. Marcus stared at his luggage scattered on the ground like garbage. "You went through my bags?" Standard procedure for removed passengers. "I wasn't removed, you're removing me." At the gate, a small crowd had gathered, other passengers waiting for different flights, airline staff. Marcus Sterling, CEO, innovator, a man worth more than everyone in that terminal combined, knelt on the cold airport floor to gather his belongings. His iPad, his laptop, the presentation materials for Thursday's meeting, clothes that had spilled from his carry-on. He felt tears burning behind his eyes and willed them not to fall. The young woman who'd recorded the incident had followed them off the plane. She was still filming. "What's your name?" she asked Marcus. He looked up at her, this stranger, who'd shown more courage than anyone else in that cabin. "Marcus Sterling," he said quietly. Her eyes widened. "Wait, Marcus Sterling? Like Sterling Aerospace? Marcus Sterling?" The officers suddenly looked uncertain. Jennifer, who'd followed them out, went pale. "Yes," Marcus said, standing now, his belongings awkwardly gathered in his arms. "The same Marcus Sterling whose company manufactures critical components for 70% of this airline's fleet, the same Marcus Sterling who sits on the advisory board for the FAA, the same Marcus Sterling who was about to finalize a 15-year, multi-billion-dollar contract with this airline's parent company." The word "was" hung in the air like thunder. Officer Miller's face had gone from stern to stricken. Thomas looked like he might vomit. Jennifer was backing away slowly, as if she could somehow undo what she'd done. "I want every one of your names," Marcus said, his voice shaking now, but loud, clear. "I want badge numbers, employee IDs. I want every detail of what just happened documented. Because in 48 hours, I have a meeting with the board of directors where we're finalizing partnerships, and I can promise you, that what happened here today is going to cost more than just my ticket price." The young woman with the phone spoke up. "I got everything, the whole thing. I'm posting this everywhere." Marcus looked at her and nodded. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Keisha. Keisha Williams." "Thank you, Keisha. You have more integrity than every person on that plane combined." The gate area was filling with onlookers now. More phones were out. Marcus could see the recognition spreading. People Googling his name, realizing what they were witnessing. An airline employee sprinted over. Someone more senior, radio crackling, panic in their eyes. "Mr. Sterling, there's been a terrible misunderstanding." "No," Marcus cut them off. "There's been no misunderstanding. There's been racism, profiling, humiliation. Don't insult me by calling it anything else." He turned to the officers. "Am I free to go, or are you detaining me?" Miller looked miserable. "You're free to go, sir. There was clearly a mistake." "A mistake," Marcus laughed bitterly. "That's one word for it." He gathered his things and walked away from the gate, away from the staring crowds, toward the escalator that would take him out of the terminal. His hands were still shaking, his suit was wrinkled, his dignity had been stripped away in front of hundreds of people. But he was walking away, alive, unharmed. That night in his hotel room, Marcus would watch Keisha's video go viral, 2 million views in 6 hours. He'd read the comments from other black professionals sharing their own stories of being profiled, questioned, removed, and he'd make a decision that would change everything.
Thursday morning, Marcus Sterling walked into the Sterling Aerospace boardroom wearing another impeccable suit and an expression that told everyone the meeting wouldn't go as planned. Seated around the table were his executive team, 3 representatives from the airline that had humiliated him, and lawyers from both sides. The airline reps looked nervous. They'd seen the video. They'd watched their company's stock drop 6% in 2 days. They'd read the thousands of comments calling for boycotts. "Gentlemen," Marcus began, standing at the head of the table, "we were supposed to finalize a 15-year, $2.3 billion partnership today. A contract that would have made your airline the most technologically advanced in the industry. Your planes would have been safer, more fuel efficient, more comfortable than any competitors." He paused, let the past tense sink in. "But 2 days ago, I was removed from one of your flights. Not because I was a threat, not because I'd violated any policy, but because a flight attendant looked at a black man in first class and couldn't believe he belonged there. And when I tried to prove I did belong, your company's response was to call security, humiliate me in front of hundreds of people, and dump my belongings on the floor like trash." The airline representatives tried to interject, apologies, explanations, promises of training and policy changes. Marcus held up his hand. "Your company released a statement calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding. But here's what I understand. You have a systemic problem. This wasn't one bad employee, this was your culture, your training, your policies that allow people like me to be treated as suspects in the spaces we have every right to occupy." He opened his laptop and turned it so everyone could see the screen. It showed Keisha's video, the view count now at 18 million. "The world is watching," Marcus said. "They're watching how you handle this. They're watching how I handle this. And I've decided that I will not do business with a company that treats people who look like me as criminals first and customers second." "Mr. Sterling," one of the airline executives pleaded, "we're prepared to offer substantial compensation, full apology, policy reforms, diversity training for all staff." "I don't want your money," Marcus cut him off. "I want accountability. I want Jennifer fired. I want Thomas fired. I want every single person who participated in or enabled what happened to face consequences. Real consequences. Not paid leave, not transfers, termination. We can't just, then we're done here." Marcus closed his laptop. "I'm withdrawing Sterling Aerospace from this partnership, effective immediately. And I'll be recommending to our other airline partners that they reconsider their relationships with your company until you demonstrate real change." The room went silent. "Do you understand what you're doing?" one of the lawyers asked carefully. "This contract represents significant revenue for your company, too." Marcus smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "I understand perfectly. I'm choosing dignity over dollars. I'm choosing to use my power in a way that millions of black people in this country don't have the privilege to do. Because for every Marcus Sterling who has the resources to fight back, there are thousands of people who suffer this same humiliation in silence, who lose jobs, miss flights, get arrested, get hurt, or worse, because someone decided they looked suspicious." He stood, gathering his materials. "I built Sterling Aerospace from nothing. I did it despite people telling me I couldn't, despite investors who wouldn't bet on someone who looked like me, despite every barrier and bias this industry could throw at me, and I'll be damned if I'm going to compromise my principles now for any amount of money." The airline representatives left the meeting devastated. Within a week, Jennifer and Thomas were terminated. The airline CEO released a video apology, not the usual corporate non-apology, but an actual acknowledgement of systemic racism within the company. They announced a complete overhaul of their training programs, hiring an external diversity firm to audit every aspect of their operations. But the damage was done. Marcus's withdrawal from the partnership sent shockwaves through the industry. Other airlines took note. Some reached out, eager to prove they were different. Others quietly examined their own policies, terrified of becoming the next viral scandal. Keisha Williams, the young woman who'd recorded everything, used her viral fame to launch a nonprofit focused on documenting and fighting racial profiling in travel. Marcus became one of her biggest donors. 6 months later, Marcus did sign a major contract, but with a different airline, one that had approached him with genuine humility and a proven track record on diversity. The deal was even bigger than the original, $3.1 billion over 20 years. When asked by reporters why he had chosen that airline, Marcus said simply, "Because they treated me like a human being before they knew who I was, and that's the minimum standard we should all demand."